Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care, now accepting residents. They also offer day stay and respite programs. Call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the Senior Community Center is on ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, and we honor them. But today, I'd like to honor our guest, David Harrison. He checks in with us with his monthly review of national politics. David was the founder and executive director of the Northwest Policy Center at the University of Washington. As a senior lecturer, he taught policy analysts for many years at the university's Evans School. Good morning, David.
Hi. Well, let's do what we usually do and see how it works out. We've had a good time over the last long time now, 3 years, talking to each other about what's happening and hoping for the best with our country and our democracy, which seems to be forever under a certain amount of stress. It's ironic because, as some of you know, voting rules in Democratic primaries provide for the proportional distribution of delegates. So we had that when Biden eventually prevailed. There was a lot of withdrawing from the race, and then he got his delegates. But in the Republican primaries in 2016, they were winner-take-all primaries, and it was way late in the summer before Donald Trump got 50% of anything. And if they had been selecting their candidate by the rules that Democrats use, Trump never would have been president, and wouldn't have that been a wonderful thing. So today I want to talk about three things. As you know, we usually do segments. In segment number one, I want to reflect on Ukraine for a minute. And then as we think of Zelensky as Winston Churchill type, I want to reflect on profiles in political courage and who's standing up to Trump really, and who's sort of, and who's not at all, and what it means for the election. And then I'll end with a little section on what we can do and where we go from here. So let's start by talking about the Ukraine a little bit. As you know from the outset, we were not going to send soldiers to Ukraine. It's not just Joe Biden's thought, but NATO's thought and Republican leadership thought is that we would not fight World War III over a non-NATO country. And it turns out that we've grown from 12 NATO countries at the outset in the late 40s to 30. So the Baltics are NATO countries, and Poland is, Turkey is. So it's
that was probably from
there's a commitment by us, a mutual force commitment, as you know, to protect somebody who's attacked. So 30 countries is a lot to protect in terms of avoiding World War III. And we're remembering, of course, that the collective NATO force, if it were engaged, could obliterate Putin's forces. But of course, that would risk the start of World War III. So how is this going to end out? It's going to end out with a deal where Zelensky pledges a neutral country. It might be actually in the European Union. Russians have sounded receptive to that. Crimea will be mostly settled as a Russian takeover. The Donbass will still be in an uneasy state, and Ukraine will have been decimated, but so will have Putin's economy and international standing. It's a bad deal for the Ukraine because other than not being losing their sovereignty, they get killed, get their cities destroyed without, and have to give up the right to join NATO. But that will be the deal. Politically, it's good for Biden and it's good for the West because, as you know, we went through a time when Trump was president where the very existence of NATO was under question, and to have not only a strong Western alliance, but one that sacrifices for each other is a wonderful thing. That is, a lot of those sanctions are things that Joe Biden talked European countries into doing. Their economies are much more intertwined with Russia's, not just their energy economies. And so they've had to sacrifice to support Zelensky and to estrange themselves from Biden, from Putin. So that's a good thing. It's not clear how else we could have played it. It's awful to watch. It's very compelling to watch people fight for their very freedom. We like to think we would do that. I think we would. So it's really something to watch. And I think by now we realize that the Russian strategy of using tanks and armored vehicles to advance rapidly and in huge numbers was only going to work if it succeeded in 4 days. And if Ukrainians did not have American and British shoulder-armed anti-tank missiles, that's what stalled the advance. When you can creep through the forest with something on your shoulder, in the case of the British missile, it's 40 pounds, and you can get within a mile and take out a tank and kill people, then you can sustain your defense longer. So that's exactly what they have done. So where are we? We don't have World War III. We built a massive NATO alliance. We crumbled Putin's economy. Trump continues to be a fool with regard to it and mention Putin like he's somebody to deal with as an equal. And nobody's going to campaign against Biden, say that we should have gone in. And weirdly, of course, it takes Afghanistan out of the picture as a campaign issue. So that's where we stand politically right now. Let's stop and talk about Ukraine for a minute before I go on to what I want to talk about, which is Profiles in Courage.
Sheila.
Yeah, I heard one of the commentators talk about a need for a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. What do you think?
Well, I think once the fighting is stopped, that's absolutely right. And that reconstruction money is not obviously going to come from Russia. It's going to come from the West. And I think the West will be very interested in doing it. However, it does go to the deal that Zelensky's going to cut, because one of the reasons in the early teens that we were not giving Ukraine a lot of weapons was for a while they fell to a Russian sympathist. Putin puppet took over. And so we have always been worried about getting so close to Ukraine that we supply them weapons that will eventually become Russian weapons. But now that this resistance has been created, I think we're fine on that front. So depending on the deal, I think Zelensky wants a U.S. guarantee or a Western guarantee of security that is short of him being a NATO member. If they can figure out what that means, then the West will supply tens of billions of dollars to rebuild Ukraine. And the Marshall Plan is a great example of something like that was done to our advantage and to the advantages of the countries being reconstructed. So that's where we are with Ukraine, and it's interesting. I'll mention it again later, but it's nice to see, for the most part, both parties be on the same side. There's a little sniping at Biden over, well, if Trump was in power, that never would have happened. I don't think anybody believes hardly any Republican believes that Trump is some kind of spiritual leader on Ukraine, especially since he was holding up anti-aircraft weaponry when he asked Zelensky, same man, about Hunter Biden. So I think that plus about Trump calling Putin a genius, I think pretty much disadvantages Republicans from launching a political attack on Biden. I think it's quite obvious that Biden put together the NATO alliance that has served Zelensky so well.
David, I just saw that Zelensky fired 2 generals as traitors. What do you know about that?
Just what you read, that 2 generals in the East who were thought to be at least exchanging intelligence with the Russians. So, I mean, when you think about it, they were once a part of Russia, so you would expect there to be some kind of military history running through families. So it didn't shock me. It pleased me that Zelensky's in enough control so he can figure out who is quitting themselves and who is not.
Thank you.
So I want to head, if there are no more questions, I want to head toward what this all means to who is a hero in American political life. And I have a parable to tell you. So first, Zelensky's being compared to Winston Churchill. It's interesting because Zelensky is not a fully, as you know, he was a TV comedian, and he's not a fully formed governmental leader, but what he has is the ability to communicate. And what he also has is monumental courage, because when Churchill was doing that, obviously England was in grave shape, and there could have been an invasion at any time. And if Stalin had and Hitler hadn't decided to move east towards Stalin, we might have had a different world history. It might have been too late for us to help the Brits. At any rate, Churchill wasn't in immediate danger of dying. All this time, Zelensky could die any day. I mean, they could drop a bomb on his head, or an assassin could get him. So I think it's a remarkable thing. When I was doing political things around the country, when I would work for or meet with an elected official, I had a habit of asking them who their favorite elected official was. You know, but baseball players have their favorite baseball players, and actors have their people who are actors, writers. Who was the elected? So I worked a long time for the Republican governor of Michigan years ago, and his favorite was Nelson Rockefeller. He said he could work a room and articulate what could be done and work it out with people better than anybody he ever met. And it was so smart. And so I asked Michael Dukakis, who was a generation different than Bill Clinton. Dukakis said, it's Clinton. Have you ever seen him work a room? He would be with 30 governors, and he would be having the ideas, and he would be articulating them, and he would be getting us to understand things. So then I haven't told you this story before. Have I told you this story before? Good.
No, I don't think so.
Oh, good. So I got on a call. I had some fellows at the UW who were Hubert Humphrey International Fellows. So we did a Zoom with Walter Mondale. And so I thought it would be nice to ask him the same question, thinking all along that he was going to say Hubert Humphrey was his mentor. And And Hubert Humphrey gave Walter Mondale his start in politics. And Mondale said, Anwar Sadat, he knew he was going to die when he did what he did. He knew he was going to die. So that when we talk about who's willing to stand up to Trump, we should remember that showing political courage could be an incredible thing. So I'm thinking in terms of modern day republicanism, which is a long way. And then we grew up with Profiles in Courage, and John F. Kennedy wrote Profiles in Courage. And his big profile in courage was Edmund Ross, who was a senator from Kansas who cast the vote to save Andrew Johnson from impeachment. And that was the right vote because they were impeaching him because he wasn't following consultation process on whether he should fire the Secretary of Defense. Congress was clearly in the wrong, but Andrew Johnson was awful. He was one of the reasons we got alleged Reconstruction that re-enslaved African Americans. So you hate to have a profile in courage be someone who otherwise was a reprehensible human being. At any rate, there aren't very many profiles in courage right now among Republicans, but there are. We wonder why more Republicans who know, they go home at night and say, I can't believe what Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever her name is, or Madison Cawthorn or Trump himself did today, or Ted Cruz, or I can't believe Josh Hawley's awful attacks on Judge Jackson. The Republicans go home every day and say those things to each other, but you don't have to have very much of your regular voting base disapprove of you to become uncompetitive politically. So even if you could conceptualize it, 20% of all the Republicans in your district would not want you to say bad things about Trump. Sometimes that's enough to destroy your political career. And as much as elected officials complain about the hard work, and they do work hard, most of them want to stay until they leave voluntarily. They don't like to lose. Jay Inslee lost twice in his career, and he once told me when I lost a race that you're not really. Well, he said it at the time in a male way. He said, "You're not a man if you don't lose at least twice." And then now he's won 77 times. But anyway, elected officials don't like to lose, and they don't like to do things that cause them to lose. And so you get an incredible jerk like Lindsey Graham, who you never know what he's going to say because it's a daily calculation on whatever. So he goes from voting for Judge Jackson for the appellate court to assassinating her integrity a couple of years later, to loving John McCain, who was the antithesis of Trump, to loving Trump, to rejecting Trump, to accepting Trump. At any rate, there's levels. For the last 4 years, we heard Bob Corker of Tennessee, Governor Chris Christie, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, Jeff Flake, even the Saint and McCain. None of them were sacrificing politically when they were criticizing Trump. Flake already knew he wasn't going to run. Corker wasn't going to run. Romney can do whatever he wants. He's just filling out his Senate seat till the end of the term. So these are Susan Collins. It benefits her politically to be right where she is. Mitch McConnell wants her there. Mitch McConnell will never kneecap her for the vote she just gave to Judge Jackson. So you can save all the genuflection in the direction of these people because they're not sacrificing. However, there are some sacrificers. Lisa Murkowski, who knows what's going to happen to her in Alaska? And she's got guts. Richard Burr, the North Carolina Republican who was head of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There's all this stuff. Trump's now suing Hillary Clinton for making up the Russia story. except there's an 800-page report that Richard Burr put out that verifies a lot of the Russian story. Not that they prosecuted him, which they didn't, but is all that Hillary or anybody would need to provide the evidence that they were not libeling or slandering Trump. Mo Brooks is the new story. Mo Brooks is running, doesn't need to be anymore, in Alabama for the Senate seat. And he did everything but daily lick the boots of Trump, except to say that we should get beyond Trump's claims that he actually won the election. That's the only thing Brooks ever did to Trump that Trump would disapprove of. Meanwhile, Trump just unendorsed Brooks because of that. And Brooks said, well, let's say the following things about what Trump asked me to do as a part of the coup. So he might well testify before the January 6th committee. And even that isn't a huge profile of courage, because all of this, the only courageous thing he said is let's move beyond that election. But there is some courage in that. And he said that because it was true and because it hurts his soul to have people faking, to have somebody despoil the electoral process. Now I want to get to the real highlights, the people who are putting it down. And that includes, strangely but wonderfully, Liz Cheney in Wyoming. Now we're going to be watching these things emerge because everybody's got a primary at a different time. Liz Cheney is in trouble and she's got a primary in August. Remember, she's Dick Cheney's daughter, and Trump would use every opportunity to say snotty things about George Bush and to some extent about Dick Cheney. So remember, this is a familial fight, but it's also that she believes in the Constitution. She doesn't think insurrections should be all right. She's against coups. So she's very conservative, but you want her to win in August. And there isn't anything about what she's doing that is helping her. They say she wants to run for president. Liz Cheney's not going to be president. So whether she wants to run, this is not helping her. There's some other strange ones to watch, and I want to pay attention for a second to a woman named Nancy Gage. Nancy Gage is not one of the 10 or so 10 Republicans voted for impeachment second time around in the House. 3 of them have retired, and 7 of them are running, and 6 of them have Trump opponents. So Nancy, oops, I said that wrong. Nancy Gage just opposed the insurrection. She didn't even vote for impeachment. At any rate, Trump has decided to go after her in South Carolina in June, and the people objecting to Trump doing that are Nikki Haley and Mick Mulvaney. So this is where it gets really cool. You want to see that kind of split where conservative Republicans with one last little shred of integrity are battling against conservative Republicans who never even thought of having integrity. And that's what's happening. So Nikki Haley is sponsoring fundraisers, and that doesn't please Trump. What it means, for those of you who are watching, is Nikki Haley is trying to get in that race for president as a Trump-loving but still principled person, just slightly to the center from that jerk Ron DeSantis. So, I mean, I hope you'd rather have Nikki Haley be president than, I know you don't want either of them, but you'd rather have Nikki Haley be president than Ron DeSantis, and that's what she's doing. Meanwhile, that primary for Nancy Mace in South Carolina is in June, and that will tell a story. Will Republicans stand up for Brian Kemp in Georgia, who's Trump is after and who is ahead? Will they listen to his endorsements in other places, or can somebody win that primary that Trump doesn't endorse? And the first test of that will be in Georgia, where Nancy is running against Katie Arrington, who's the person who beat Mark Sanford in 2018. So to make a long story short, these races are very interesting to us. First, if we had to select one of two Republicans, we would like to select the person who thinks that coups are bad. That would be good. However, it is also true that if the person to the right wins, that we can peel off some of the center and have a chance to win some of those seats. And my goodness, a visitor from the East.
I know. Hi, Christina.
So that's
Hi,
what's
everyone.
good to have you. So that's what's going on there. And my meditation is we're watching these things. There's two other things I want to say about this profile and courage thing. Sometimes courage is shown in before primaries when there are like 6 or 8 candidates, maybe all from the same party. Maybe it's a heavily Democratic or Republican district. So 30 years ago, there was a backbench, or more longer than that, a backbench state legislator in Massachusetts named Ed Markey, who's ever since then been a congressman and now a senator. Ed Markey said something that the Democratic Speaker of the House didn't like, and the Speaker of the House had his desk moved out into the hallway. The Globe covered it. A month later, some congressman decided not to run in again, and Ed Markey got 30% in the Democratic primary and thus became the candidate because there were 6 candidates. And he's had a career ever since that might well not have happened if he wasn't in the news in a big way just before an opportunity became available. So strange things happen, and that's to watch for. In Washington, where we live, there is interesting things going on. First, I and some other people are going to do a Kim Schreier fundraiser on the island in May or June. Kim Schreier is under serious challenge. We won that seat back in 2018. We are not going to lose it. We're going to get a big assembly on Bainbridge Island, and we're going to pretend for a day that she's our congressman rather than beloved Derek Kilmer, who doesn't have a hard race. So we have talked to Kim, and she would love to come over and be adopted by us. There's 2 other things going on. We actually had 2 votes of Republicans for impeachment. One, Jamie Herrera Butler has challenges from the right. As you know, in this state, Democrats can cross over. So the reason why she was reelected last time, some Democrats voted for her. So I think she'll probably be okay. And then we have the story of Dan Newhouse from Sunnyside, Washington, who is a farmer and who won his race last time by 30 points in his district, was more votes than Trump got, and who voted for impeachment. Now, why did he do that? Because he couldn't look himself in the mirror if he didn't. He's very conservative. He's against coups. It just bothers him. And so he voted that way. And now he's in a world of hurt. And running against him principally is the most maniacal Washington Republican politician, and that's Lauren Culp, who ran for governor against Inslee. Lauren Culp is almost insane. They say he was the police chief in Republican Washington, but he was the police man. He didn't have anybody working for him, and good thing. And he finally had to withdraw. As you know, he lost by 700,000 votes. He finally had to withdraw his voter fraud lawsuit when the court threatened him with, or his lawyer, with fines for a frivolous suit. So this should be interesting. If Culp takes out Newhouse in the primary, then it's all in our chance to take that seat back. That's Inslee's old seat. So there's a Doug White, who's a very serious Yakima businessman candidate, and we're just waiting to see if that happens. Newhouse beating Culp would be great. If Culp's going to beat Newhouse, then we have to win the center and win that seat back. So that's the story my little
Hey.
meditation on his profile and courage. And then in our last segment, we'll talk about what's happening right now in Congress.
David, what did you say about Derek Kilmer?
So Derek Kilmer does not have a challenge. I'm not a meaningful challenge. They're not going to pick off Derek Kilmer.
No.
He
safe.
doesn't have a chance, you said?
Challenge.
Or
Derek Kilmer. Derek Kilmer is going to be your congressman for as long as Norm Dix was, unless he becomes a senator or a governor.
Which
He's
he
an
probably
awesome congressman. I'm
Yeah.
saying that it gives us Derek's easy races where he gets 60-65% is a chance for us to adopt Kim Schroeder as well. And
Right.
Derek's not going to say, please do that, but he's not going to buy.
I don't understand Lauren Culp. I mean, he is still running for, I mean, considering everybody knows his past, it's just stunning to me.
Well, I mean, there are certain, you don't have to drive around Eastern Washington very long without discovering that there are some folks over there that may not be comfortable joining us on this call.
Oh, that's true. You're right. You're right. Okay, I get it. Oh, Tom, you have a question?
Just a comment, and David, I'm sure remembers this, but not too long ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, Patty Lent, remember when she was the commissioner and she voted against an issue the Republicans were really, wanted to get through. I think it was a racetrack. And they, the chairman, the Republican chairman at the time, I think it was Hamilton, ran against her in the primary and beat her. He was not liked by, even his own party that much, but it was a punishment to her. And she lost. And Josh Brown, who was like probably the youngest person that ever got elected, was elected here as a county commissioner.
There's a history before that. Karen Schmidt was replaced by the appointee Beverly Woods, who was a friend of Karen's and was one of the last surviving moderate Republicans. She beat me very narrowly, and then she beat Sherry Appleton very narrowly, and then Christine Rolfus beat her. But in between there, Republicans abandoned her over voting for the gas tax. So Republicans helped speed their demise in Kitsap County. If they would have held on to the commissioner's seats, just what you just said, much longer if they could have nominated moderates, but they executed Patty Lent and before then executed Beverly Woods.
And Patty would have won had she.
Yeah, absolutely.
She was good. I mean, she was smart and a good campaigner.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move to theme 3. We got a last 20 minutes. The bad news in theme 3, of course, is we're behind. We have talked on this call before on what we need to do to have good results in November, given that the party in power often loses off-year elections, as Trump did in 2018 and famously Obama did in 2010, where we got massacred. So you think, how could this be that the generic Republican congressional vote is +4? So, and it can be that way because you could be for generic Republicans and not love Madison Cawthorn or something. That's a vote that's worried about big government, or it might be a vote that's just voting on how awful things have been the last 4 or 5 years. So if you're not, it's ironic because we only have 50 senators. It's ironic that we would pay the price for being in power, since it took Trump in Georgia for us to have power. But we have done a lot of things. And every time you do something like pass a $2 trillion bill, you've got somebody who thinks that maybe you haven't raised enough revenue to do that. I also would argue that Joe Biden at 68, which was much stronger than at 78. You know, he wanted to be president when Hillary ran. He wanted to be president when Barack ran. So I'm not quite 78, but I would have a hard time. Oh, I think he's doing fine. I'm just saying it's harder to be an enormously popular president when you have energy gaps and such. At any rate, we're behind. And the story of how we can get ahead is pretty much the same story that I've told you for the last year. Today, it was reported in the news that we have the fewest COVID hospitalizations at any time since they started keeping record. And today, it was reported at the same time that we have the lowest unemployment at any time since the pandemic began. If we can only get credit for Joe Biden for any role in either of those things, our standing will improve. And remember also that Biden's low polls are higher than Trump's. So, I mean, and it doesn't mean that they're out there loving Trump. It means they're out there with almost a knee-jerk response for, especially knowing that we would continue to hold the presidency. There's a lot of Americans that think the Biden government is not such an awful thing. So what could happen? Every day that's work being done, where Biden is going to say this summer, look at us walking around without being hospitalized, and look for us with a vibrant economy, look for us with a strong new NATO coalition. And then he's hoping to be able to say and look at our progress on managing inflation and the gas increases. As you know, he just did $1 million, 1 million gallons a day from 1 million barrels a day from the petroleum reserve. And he's also hoping for one more thing that we talked about before, and which I had hoped would be done by fall. Manchin's back to the bargaining table on a climate package. He's driving a hard bargain. He's not sure he's for the president's income tax rates on billionaires, but he is willing to consider a $500 billion carbon incentives program. And there are Democrats who see that as real. Manchin was very upset over the judicial hearings. So it's not inconceivable that we'll have that one more plank. That would be nice as long as they don't have to give up too much in terms of Manchin's love for fossil fuels. What else could happen? Some other crisis, good or bad. We've had plenty of crises. You don't know what crisis is going to happen between now and November. Someone's health issue, either Biden's or Trump's or someone else. You don't know whether that could emerge. Hunter Biden, unfortunately, could become a story. I don't think it would ever be a huge story because I don't think Americans will believe it has much to do with Joe, and because Trump will do his usual lying about it, which will be helpful. Trump being indicted is the big one. I think the chances that Merrick Garland is going to indict Trump based upon evidence partly collected by the January 6th committee is very high. And I wouldn't get mixed up by the federal court and federal prosecutors state prosecutors in New York who had a different evidentiary set with regard to those criminal claims. I think Garland saying we'll do where the evidence takes us is compelling, and I think the evidence is going to take him to indicting Trump for a role in the coup. It will be interesting because we have such broad standards for what is permissible speech in this country, and you can go and say a lot of things, but what they're trying to establish that with all those things were interconnected, that Trump's appeal from December 20th on for people to assemble in January 6th was all a part of a plan to try and bring down the vote. And that would be what the substance of Merrick Garland's conspiracy charge. That's the thing that could happen that might most improve our chances. But right now, we're just trying to get traction on the good things that we have done. And we're trying to get advantage from the races where Trump is screwing it up. A monumental one in Missouri where he's might support the formerly jailed Eric Greitens, the former mayor, former governor. So Trump's giving us some help. It's just we're looking for as much of it as he can provide. But right now, if the election were today, we would lose 30 seats in the House and maybe 3-4 seats in the Senate. It's interesting. People who are watching the Senate are saying our 3 best chances for takebacks are North Carolina, which is open seat, Wisconsin, which is Ron Johnson, and Pennsylvania, which is open seat. I think there's a shot at the next 3 for sure. Val Deming's running against Rubio in Florida. I think there's a shot with Tim Ryan running against a number of candidates in Ohio. And I think there's a little shot in Missouri if the governor, former governor, gets nominated. It'll open up the center. So the medium bad thing that could happen would be we would hold on to the Senate and lose the House by 20 or so votes. But for us to win the House, we just got to get going in a way that we're not going right now. We do not have nearly the energy in the resistance that we had in the 4 years that Trump was in office, partly because of the COVID. So I'll close by saying what I think we could do to heighten that resistance. Let me come back first.
Are you there?
I'm there. So
There you go. You're okay.
there's a new organization called Walk the Walk. For those of you who are looking for where to put constrained dollars, a lot of people are swearing lately by Walk the Walk, which is tied to the Movement Voter Project. I myself have been pushing for targeting very much to swing left, which is very sophisticated and not going too far in who they're supporting, and which pioneered district funds where they raise money for candidates even before they're the ones selected in the primary. All these things are noted in my blog, which will come out tomorrow. For those of you who are looking for ways to do postcards and such, or door-to-door campaigning, there's still some, as I understand it, some postcard writing on the island. But if you can't find your group, absolutely go to Common Power, which I've talked to you about before. Common Power is Seattle-based. A lot of Islanders work for them. That's run by David Dobke. He's a star. And they are really, really good at developing partners in swing states. So if you're thinking that you're not doing enough, give more money or spend more time, or give more money and spend more time. That's my prognosis. So to summarize, we're in trouble. In the meantime, we've done a lot of good things for America. We've done the right thing on Ukraine. We've rebuilt the economy. We've fought the COVID. We haven't bought into the bullshit that is baloney that has happened with regard to vaccines and masks. I think we stood tall for our country, and we're in infinitely better shape than we were when Donald Trump was president. If the worst happens and we lose both the Senate and the House, we'll still have the presidency for 2 years, so we can keep very bad things happening in a government that reaches across the aisle. And then if that happens, the shift in power will go back to the Murkowskis and Susan Collins, and Collins is the world. Whatever is left as a moderate Republican senator will be the ones deciding how to coalesce with Biden. So hopefully that won't happen. We're in much better shape having to well, we could get to 52 or 54 and make Mansion a footnote too, but we're much better at 50 than we are at 48. The race in Georgia is interesting. Herschel Walker is a former abuser of his spouse. He's likely to get the nomination, so Raphael Warnock is not at all out of the picture, and we have a decent shot at maintaining that. And if Brian Kemp and Perdue keep on battling for the Republican nomination for governor, we got Stacey Abrams in the win and in the wings. She could win that governorship. It's not out of the question at all.
That would be awesome.
You know, Beto's not that far behind Greg Abbott in Texas. I don't sell the year short. It's just, it doesn't look so good in terms of the generic vote for the House.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of words, my friends. What do you think of any or all of that?
Yeah, Tom.
I think two things that really hurt us. Number one, the price of gasoline. Everybody, has to deal with that. That's a real negative. No matter how, no matter why it is or what the cause is, that's out there. Everybody sees it every day. And the other thing, I've felt this as time goes on, where nothing's happening on, with the investigation of the riot. Who's being punished? People have been held in contempt. Nothing happens. And, they're going after Hunter Biden like he was a mass murderer, but these people have already been found, guilty of things. Nothing's happened. And I think the average person, the voters, these things, I think they affect people.
Well, I disagree with you on that. And I'll say why. But first, on gas.
That's why I brought it up.
on gas, you're right, of course, and that's why Biden's about to spill a third of the strategic reserve. The only minor protection he gets on that is people know some of the rise in gas prices had to do with Ukraine. But as you know, there was a supply-demand issue before then. However, it was a supply-demand issue based on the pandemic. People stopped creating, they decreased their pumping based upon demand, and it hasn't caught up to the surge in demand, and then demand exceeds supply, and this happens. But tell that to the voter. You don't want to run for office when gas prices are up $1 or so. It's not a good thing. So we'll hope that by summer that we get some decrease, but summer's when people drive more. So that's why Biden's making calls to the Saudis and so forth, that so far haven't been successful, having to do with politics in the Middle East, where we're not bombing, helping him bomb Yemen as much as he wants to. It's a complex world. On the second issue, Merrick Garland's role in life is not to make us happy with what he's doing. It's to not say anything till he indicts people. So the other day, 3-4 congressmen, including Adam Schiff, took out after the Department of Justice for not filing contempt charges for certain people who haven't testified yet. And Tom, that Merrick Garland hasn't gone anywhere and isn't going anywhere. What he needs to get his convictions completed and not subject to successful appeal is to not be political, to be as careful as he can be. So it's not true that nothing's happened. Those poor 700 suckers who got arrested, there's a lot of them in jail right now.
Yeah.
Nothing's happening at the top, but between now and July or so, you'll see indictments. It all has to do with the timing of how long the committee can help him do the investigation, which is till November. long as they're in session, as long as they hold the majority, they're really basically doing communications and assembly of evidence that Garland can use. So I feel a lot better about it than you do. I think an indictment is inevitable.
I agree. And there were
Well-
2 people held in contempt this last week too.
Yeah, but what happens when they hold them in contempt, eventually as Thomas knows, there has to be, the Department of Justice has to do a filing for that to have consequences. So that's the first thing that Tom is eager for. And I'm just saying, I'm eager for it too. I just think that Garland decided a long time ago to keep out of the papers.
And I think there's a timing issue too. I think closer to the election, I think that when, more of the indictments come down closer to the election, because, one thing I've noticed about American voters, they have short-term memories problems. And I think the timing has a lot to do. That's my opinion.
Yep.
So,
I don't know about that, but Cynthia Schick, famous campaigner.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
So we're in trouble, and I'm wondering how large is the factor of the voter suppression tactics that are just keep coming and coming and coming? If we could somehow get past that and make sure that people are able to vote, would that help our situation? And also the big lie, how can we help make that go away?
I can't remember their name, but I've been touting a group of Republicans who have been doing Trump lost billboards and so forth. And it's different from the Lincoln Project, but it's in my blog, and they're doing
Accountability. The accountability.
accountability project.
Okay.
But I just blanked on the question before that.
Overcoming voter suppression.
Oh, yeah. So here, yes, it's absolutely relevant. So you think of 3 states in particular where they did suppression efforts that have meaningful impact on who will vote this November unless the courts overturn them. Those are Georgia. Well, okay, Florida, Georgia, Texas, and Arizona. So in all 4 cases, this isn't going to affect any more than, say, 5% of the vote. And as you know, you can lose over it affecting 5% of the vote. In all 4 cases, it's an attempt to suppress the vote of our voters, mostly minority voters. In Florida, a federal judge just stayed the state law. Georgia's a little less of a problem because 95% of the African Americans in the state are registered, thanks to Stacey Abrams. But it has an effect in all 4 of those states. And you think of that just with regard to the Senate, it thus affects Warnock's ability to withstand Herschel Walker's effort to unseat him. It affects Val Deming's effort to beat Marco Rubio. And we have Mark Kelly defending in Arizona, and that suppression affects his ability to defend. So you could have a worst case analysis where it could cost us 3 seats, 3 very narrow elections, but it may not. But all we can do right now at this point, since those laws are passed, is hope our legal eagles do well in fighting them. The federal judge's holding in Florida was that it was racially discriminatory law. So he overturned it on 14th Amendment grounds. I
Thank you.
think final questions, thoughts, concerns. Are we done? Things will be so much better a month from now, right?
Oh, I hope so.
They are better than they were last month. I walked down the street without my mask just the other day.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And last I checked, Zelensky's still on TV, which is remarkable 5 weeks later. Who would have thought it? Putin didn't think it. He thought he was, I mean, he would not have put a 40-mile column of tanks in jeopardy if he didn't think they were just going to roll right into Kyiv. He did not account for the nature of the resistance.
I thought that was interesting that they were saying that Putin is not being told everything that's happening militarily because they're, the military leaders are afraid of him. I thought that was interesting.
They've lost 5 or 6 generals. He's got to know
Yeah,
some things. It might be to his advantage to have that be the press.
that's
That
true.
he's, yeah.
Yeah, so,
I think if you look at Putin's history, there was an issue as to what advantage we should take when Putin went and worked for Yeltsin in Yeltsin's government. He moved to Moscow to do it. And there was all this discussion about how democracy wasn't working and the oligarchs were capturing all the assets and what was Russia's idea of how to move forward. Putin had an idea then, and that was restoration of the Soviet Union. And he, remember George Bush said he was a man he could trust, and Putin was, I think he had all the resentments, and he was just harboring them till he could take Crimea and do the things that he has done. There was at that time an argument about how much we should take advantage of the decline of the Soviet Union. And we, I think wisely, made all those countries that had been on Russian rule, most of them NATO countries. So that's why Ukraine's a target, because they're not.
right. Yeah,
There's not a chance in the world that Putin would move on Poland. That's zero.
that's a good thing.
They had a story on Putin, how much money he had. He's reputed to be the richest man in the world, $700 billion.
You know, it's a tragedy that in the fall of communism didn't figure out a way to take the enormous resources the Russian state had distributed them. They've got worse income inequality problems than we do, which is hard. And that's too bad that they had a chance to not have oligarchs, and instead they turned over their state-owned resources to oligarchs.
Yeah.
Who gave money to Putin. Well, anyway, we'll see you in a month. I think I will go to Spain and Portugal in the meantime. And
Okay, yeah, you'll let us know about your trip.
I will.
Okay,
Good to see
Dave.
you all.
Thank you so much.